All right, this is a new capsule course. What kind of constitutes a capsule course is if the project is so big to where I feel like it needs to be cut up into sections, it's effectively like a course, in my opinion, in terms of detail. So the first part is going to be the geometry node system and actually building this whole scene, and it's not super crazy, so that we're going to be building this object. The second part is the animation because, there's a good bit to it, actually making sure that things are parented correctly. Things are going to be looping correctly. And so there's things to that as well. And then the third portion is going to be actually the lighting and the shading, which is going to also translate into animation because there's lights that have to be parented and things like, but that's not super crazy. But yeah, so that is going to be all three parts. Today we are going to be on, of course, part number one. I'm using Blender 3.5.1. The new one came out, so finally there's a corrective release. And so yeah, we're just going to dive right into this. I'm going to go and let's open up a new Blender scene, clear everything out, and let's get ripping and roaring. So let's go ahead and open up this plane here, and this is all we're going to need. I always do this for geometry nodes. So we're going to hop up to the geometry nodes tab. I'm going to minimize this window and let's start building this up. I'm actually going to take this project file and bring it over to my other screen so I can kind of reference, make sure everything is done correctly for you guys. So here we go. First, what we're going to do is go ahead and get in a grid. That grid there, and we're going to go ahead and we are going to size it. I'm going to click and drag here, type in 10, which effectively is going to be about, if you were to get a regular plane and hit S5, same size. So it says 10, it's really 5, it's really the half. All right, so I'm going to go here to the wireframe view, click and drag, and just add faces. This is totally arbitrary, but in my original animation, we did 30. Oh, wow. One away. All right, so we're going to do 30. Now we're going to do a simple grid. I've taught this a couple times already. It's just insanely useful for this style of animation, which is something that I really love. So we're going to go ahead and get in a instance on points. So Shift A, get a instance on points. Throw that there. We do need to go ahead and get our particle. So I'm going to go up here to the viewport, Shift A, get in a cube, and I'm going to hit G and just kind of move them out of the way. And then right up here, I'm going to double click and call it particle. Cool. All right. Now let's go back, click on plane so we can see our geometry node system, and we can just go ahead from the outliner up here and drag it straight into our node system and then plug geometry into instance. So it's just going to look like one big thing, but there's effectively what? 60? Like a 30 by 30? We'll see if my math is right. So we need to go ahead and get a random value. We're going to be creating greebles. We're going to go from float to vector and then plug that into scale. And now we're going to get that wonderful look that we're looking for. And then here on the max, it's way too tall. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring it down a little bit. And if you can hear the guy mowing the yard outside, hopefully that's not too distracting. All right, so now we have this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Alt-D. Well, actually, no, first. See, this green line is going to represent the center. I'm going to hit the tilde key and click front. So we have that green line right there. So I'm going to just go ahead and bring him over here. And then I'm going to hit Alt-D and then right-click and then bring that one over here. So anything we change here is going to change here for two reasons. One reason, it is an instance, so we're not adding more geometry, but also the same node tree is on there. So it's all the same. All right, now we need to go ahead and get in a join geometry. Join, join geometry. And we're going to get now essentially like the pillars that are going to go up and down. So let's go ahead and get that. And because there are, 30 by 30 on the faces here, I'll wait for that guy to drive by. I want to sorely limit the amount of faces when we get a new instance on points. So what I want to do is create new points. So what we're going to do is get a distribute points on faces node. And what it's going to do is take the data from the grid And I'm going to plug that into join geometry. And you're not going to see anything. So if you do want to see your points, technically you don't need to do this, but for your own kind of knowledge, so you know they're there, I'm going to get a transform. So transform geometry, and then I'm just going to bring up here on the translation. So there's our distribute points on faces, and you can see if you bring up that density, it's going to make it more dense. So for me, I want to go to the opposite. So I'm going to bring it down, and each little point you're seeing represents a spot that I'm going to instance a much taller model. So I'm just going to bring that Z back to 0. Now it's just kind of sitting there in the middle. And then now we can get an instance on points. All right, so we do that there. And then I'm going to go down, hold down Shift and right click, Shift right click, and just give our nodes a little bit of organization. So bring that down, then bring that here. I want a little space here because let's go ahead. I'm going to take this object info node, which has our particle, Shift D, put it there, and then plug geometry into instance. So now we have this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click and drag on the scale and make these guys much skinnier. Actually, hold up. We need our random value because that's going to give us obviously some random value. So let's just get a new one. Random value, go from float to vector, and then plug that into scale. And that's going to create another Greeble system with much less particles. So what I'm going to do is these top two on the max, just bring them down like this. And then you can go ahead and bring that up, and we're still getting randomness. So we're still getting that kind of look that we want. So maybe make these guys a little bit wider, and then bring them up a little bit. So now we have created kind of a city, and then you can bring your density up if you'd like. But now we have this. I do want to get a cube, and then here in the transform, do this, and then click 5 on the scale there, and then bring it down. That's where our object is going to be. Okay. So now that we have this, I'm going to go back to layout and take these two guys here, and I'm going to hit Alt D again. Remember, not Shift D, but Alt D, that's going to create instances. If you're curious about what instances are, I created a video all about them if you are kind of confused on the topic. Then I'm also going to hit RY 180, and then I'm maybe bring it down. And the intersection is not going to bother me because it's not really something that I'm going to have to, or it's not going to be something that's going to be visual as we work on. So now what I'm going to do is click on this guy here, go back to geometry nodes, and we need to create one more thing. Which is a particle system. So actually I'm going to highlight these two, just hit H to hide them, keep my scene, reasonable. Okay, so I guess we'll go up, create this space right here for the particle system. All right, so we're going to use this space here for the particles. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a distribute points on face. Another one here, distribute points on faces. We'll plug grid into mesh. And then we'll plug that into the join geometry, and let's go ahead and get a transform geometry. And okay, cool. So we have our particles. And so what I want to do is maybe bring these guys up so they're visual, but the problem is they're all flat, and I want to kind of, goof around with them. So let's go ahead and get that distribute points on face node. Plug that there. They're going to disappear because now we need some faces. So let's just go ahead and bring these guys even higher. We just need space. All right. We need to get an icosphere. Honestly, maybe just a cube, but it's okay. And then let's plug mesh into instance. There we go. Now we have all that. Let's bring the subdivisions up to 2, and the radius. What did I put my radius? Radius. What did I put my radius in beginning? Looks like 0.01. So we'll do that here too. All right, cool. Tiny little particles that we can see now. But again, I want to randomize their up and down location. And so the way we're going to do that is we are actually going to, we're going to get a set position node. Plug that here. I keep dragging things back, but that's just the game. Then we need to get a random value. So rand, get another random value, set to vector, and then plug that into the offset. And now our particles are sky high. And then you can go ahead and bring them down. In fact, on this transform geometry, bring that down to 0. So now we can play with bringing them up like this. Cool. And then the more particles you want, you'll just go ahead and play with that density. And now it's crazy. We don't want that. So there we go. That's our particles that are going to be glowing. And then let's go ahead and bring those top ones back. So now we have particles everywhere, and the scene now just looks, those particles really create and make this scene look really, really big. And that's what we want. Let's go ahead and create the hexagon soccer ball looking object. So we'll click on a plane. We'll go back to geometry nodes. We'll click new. And then make sure to save. So let's go ahead. I'm going to call this, what should we call this? We'll call it Geospace 1, and then whatever the final product of this project file is, I will make available for you guys to use to start on part 2 in case you lose your progress or just don't care to build it and you want to start with animation. So I'm going to save that. All right. So now that we have that, I'm going to hit the period key, or actually go here. Here we go. Here it is. All right. So delete the input. We're going to get an icosphere and plug that into geometry. And then bring subdivision to 2. I'm going to scale it down and bring it up. And then I'm going to hit the period key to kind of zoom in on him. And then let's go ahead and get a dual mesh node. I love this node. I just love the sci-fi just look of it. It's one of my favorites. You've probably seen me use it quite a bit. Let's go get a split edges. Get a split edges node. Plug it there. And you're not going to see anything technically happen. So what you'll do is go to the modifiers and add in a smooth node. And now you will see some stuff happen. I'm going to go ahead and you play with that factor to make sure how small or big you want them to be. I'm going to go get a solidify and then solidify that. And let's also go ahead and bevel it because we don't like sharp, sharp, sharp edges in 3D. All right, cool. And then you'll need to go back and click on the GeoNodes modifier. As you'll notice, it's not shade smooth. So set shade smooth. Boom, there we go. All right, so now we have that. I do want him to be a little bit more open here. And then I'm gonna hit Shift D and then scale it down so that it's a little bit more solidified in there. And then what you can do is go ahead and click on that one in the middle. So maybe you're clicking around, make sure you click on the one there, hold down Shift, click on this guy, hit Control P, click object, and that's going to parent. So if I hit G and move it, that one in the middle is moving it with it. Now, most of the parenting is going to be done, I think in part 2, but we just might as well get that out of the way. So now that he is all ready, and we can go, actually we'll leave him there. Just keep everything at a central location for the next setup. All right, so we have this. In fact, maybe make him bigger. He's definitely gonna wanna be bigger. All right, now let's go ahead and set up the loop. Then we can go into part 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight everything except for that soccer ball. And then I'm going to hit the tilde key and go to the front just to make sure I'm set up correctly. I'm going to hit M, new collection, and I'm going to call it loop. You can call it literally whatever you want it to be. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to instance this here. So we can go to collection instance and loop, and then we're going to bring it over. But I want to make sure that this is going to be looping correctly and set up correctly for when we start to animate. So what I always do is I use a guide. I like to have a guide. So I'm going to click on a plane, and that plane is going to be right there. And then I'm going to hit S5 because 5 by 5 is the size of everything we've created. And if you stay within that 5 by 5 frame, this scene will loop correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and hit M and add it to the loop. So what I'm going to do now, Shift A, collection instance, loop. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold down Control so it snaps to grid. And notice that plane. See where that plane is, that flat portion? Make sure you're holding down Control to snap to grid. And if he just kisses the edge there, you'll know that you instanced it down the line properly. And then I'm going to hit Alt D. I'm gonna do the same thing. See that? And then we're gonna take, now we're gonna take these two, hit Alt D. And this may be as many instances as we need. Now I'm gonna keep that guide there just in case. So I'm gonna click it, go to the modifiers, add modifier, and we're gonna go and use a mask. That's gonna disappear him. And then I'm gonna click on the soccer ball and hit the period key so that we are back to an equal spot. And this is the scene. We've now created this whole thing in Geometry Nodes. And it has been 17 minutes. Wow, time flies. That's part one. So what I'm gonna do, we're at a stopping point. So I'm gonna go ahead and click File, Save. And this is the file you're gonna wanna open if, say, you lose a position or just wanna start from scratch on the file that I made to go into part two. So we're gonna end here and I'll see you in part two.